Welcome to Handi Quilters Watch and Learn. I'm Kim Sandberg, and with me today is Kristina Whitney. And we're here to talk about teeny tiny little things today. We're going to talk about microquilting. So microquilting, Kristina, what is microquilting?
Microquilting is any quilting that you do, but on a small scale.
Exactly, exactly. We actually were joking and we were saying, is there a formula we could figure out or something? And no.
Yeah.
But one person's microquilting might be another person's regular quilting. So there's it's not necessarily that there's a standard, but microquilting is generally used for fills in like backgrounds, right?
Yep.
So why do we use it in the background?
Well, a lot of times we use it in the background because it sandwiches everything together really, really tight. And then the parts that you don't have the microquilting in are going to pop.
Exactly.
So if you have something like a motif or something that you really want to have stand out, if you do that microquilting around the back of it, it's really going to add that extra pop to the motif.
Exactly.
Let's do that one more time. Pop.
I love that.
We didn't plan that.
No, not at all. But it's so true. Whatever part of the quilting is not quilted is what your eye tends to be drawn to.
Yeah.
And microquilting can really make those areas pop.
Yeah. So with that being said, generally, not always, but a lot of times we want to use a blending thread.
Right.
One that will just kind of sink right into that fabric. It doesn't draw the eye away from what you are wanting it to be focused on.
However, we do have an example here, which was actually done on a stationary machine. So the answer is yes, you can do microquilting on a stationary machine. Here's some little minis that I made, and I actually wanted that microquilting to pop and kind of be the focus. So, you know, there are those occasions when you want that tiny little quilting, and so I did use a contrasting thread here. And some people might say that this isn't necessarily micro because it's not super, super teeny tiny, but for me, this is microquilting.
Yep, let's stick another one in there for you to see.
Got another fun design. So
I think these are great, and I think it's really important that we let people realize that the term microquilting, again, there's no scientific measurement for what size it has to be.
Exactly.
It's what you want it to be.
Exactly.
So sometimes I will do microquilting that is just total scribbles, and that's actually my technical name for it, and I know other people use that, and it's just, all you're doing is laying down thread.
Right.
And
packing down that fabric and the batting, right? Making it really flat.
Yeah. So with that, I like to use a really fine thread.
Okay.
So
yeah, let's talk threads. So what are the threads that you really like to use for microquilting?
Well, here's a couple.
Okay.
These are Microquilter from Superior Threads. We also have Wonderfill. This is Invisifill, and these are both 100 weight.
Oh, super fine threads.
I forgot my silk, but silk is another one. But with these really fine threads, you don't get all that thread buildup.
Right.
So if I were to use a really thick thread like this 12 weight, if I'm doing microquilting and just laying down that thread on top of each other, it's going to be standing up. I mean, it's going to have a lot of buildup.
It's going to actually like almost create a texture, isn't it?
Yeah.
Even? Not just the quilting texture, but like the thread.
Yeah. Yep. So, you know, again, you could do microquilting with So Sassy 12 weight thread, but I generally use a finer thread like the 100 weights.
Okay.
Yeah. Awesome. And with the 100 weight, I like to use about a size 14 needle.
Okay. Yeah. So a much finer needle, which makes sense. That's what you want. You don't need as big of a needle when you're using those super fine threads.
Correct.
So that's always important. Okay, so let's talk about some of the other things that we always want to take a look at when we're talking about microquilting. What about the foot that you use? What foot do you like to use?
Okay. In the past, I would use the open toe foot that came with the machine because it had that little opening so I could see. Well, Handi Quilters come out with a newer foot called the Microfoot.
Right.
And it is fabulous. I always joke around saying that it looks like it's a broken foot.
Oh, it does. It does.
If we
I still remember when they brought it up and to have us test it, and we were like, where's the rest of it? And they're like, no, this is it. It's so that you have a totally clear view of that needle, right?
Yep. And depending on which machine you have, it can be oriented differently. But yeah, it gives you that visual area that you can see what you are doing.
Very nice.
So
see exactly where you're putting those stitches, right?
Yeah, I just finished doing a Dream Big quilt, and I had the Microfoot on for the entire thing.
Oh wow, awesome.
So I love it. I do have to caution that you keep your fingers away from the needle.
Yes, yes. It is, yes, pretty wide open there.
Yes, safety first.
Safety first, always, 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 always. Okay, so we've got our foot. Now let's talk about the stitch modes that you do this in. What stitch mode do you like to use when you're stitching for?
It depends on my mood.
Okay.
So I will tell you what I use most of the time. I'll use a cruise at a high speed.
Okay.
Or I will use a manual.
Okay. And why? So why do you use cruise over manual sometimes and vice versa?
So manual mode is when the needle is just constantly moving, and I'm the one that is setting that stitch regulation.
Okay.
And it just feels and sounds smoother to me. Do you want to hear what it sounds like?
Yeah, let's hear that.
Okay, so let's bring this machine over here. I'm going to bring up my bobbin thread. And for this part, I am wanting these hearts and these diamond shapes to be the focus.
Okay.
So I'm laying down thread on this different background fabric or section. It's all one fabric.
And which mode are you in right now so we know what to listen for?
Well, let me check and see here. Okay. Let's move all my stuff out of the way. So right now I am in a cruise mode.
Okay.
Set at a speed of 275, and I'm going to change my stitches per inch. When I'm doing micro, I like to go up to like maybe 14 or 15 stitches per inch.
Yeah.
And let's see. Okay, so you can hear, and the machine kind of pauses when I pause.
Right.
Okay, now I'm going to change to manual mode. Right now it is set at 550, and you can play with that and adjust your speed. But see how it's just consistent and it just kind of flows smoothly. And when I'm making such small movements, it doesn't really show my stitch length variation.
Right. Well, especially because you're using a blending thread. You're not going to see those stitches anyway. Micro quilting is not about seeing the actual quilting, it's just about really creating a texture. Okay, so that's cool. Like the two different modes you have there, I can see kind of depending on what you want to, what you're feeling like, smooth or...
It's a personal preference.
It's a personal preference.
I encourage everybody to play with these different modes, and not just the modes themselves, but play with the speeds.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Totally makes sense. And it probably varies depending on the design you're doing too.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So let's talk about lighting. Lighting is another something that's really important. And actually, before we talk about lighting, let's talk about having your machine ready to stitch. Yeah, Kristina just got the batting there. We actually got this all set up, and Kristina started quilting, and she's like, wait, this is like not fantastic. So what did we have to do?
Clean your wheels, clean your frame, clean the rails, any little buildup on there. When you're doing micro quilting, you're gonna feel it.
Yeah.
So
make sure you clean. So we gave this machine a good clean, and it's a lot better now, right?
Much smoother. Yes.
Smoother.
And make sure there's no threads twisted around.
Right. So. Absolutely. Double check that one too. Okay, so then let's talk about lighting.
Okay. So for filming purposes, I have the machine lights turned off, but I'm going to go ahead and turn those back on. So I have lots of lighting that can help me see while I'm doing this micro quilting. Sometimes though, depending on the thread color and stuff, it's kind of hard to see what you're doing. So one thing that you can try is turning off one of the lights and see if that changes your view of where the thread is. Or try the other light, okay?
Okay.
So sometimes I just turn them all off.
Okay.
And sometimes I put on our Handi light, which clamps on, and you plug it into your USB. And it's got this snaking light, and you can bring it down so that it can light from the side.
Cast that shadow, right? So that you can really see that texture as you're laying it down.
Yep, so sometimes that's a great option. So play with those lights again and see. And I will change the lights as I'm stitching, because sometimes different areas will, the lighting will be different, or sometimes my eyes get tired and I want to change the lighting just to give my eyes a little bit of a break. So yeah, play with those.
Okay, so I think that's pretty much everything except the handlebars to get you set up ready to go. So let's talk about the handlebars for a minute. Depending on the machine you have, you know, if you've got a Forte, an Avante, or an Infinity, those handlebars are adjustable.
Not the Avante, the Amara.
Oh, sorry, the Amara.
Yeah.
That's what I meant, the Amara.
I knew what you meant.
However, if you have the Avante or the Fusion, you can add the micro handles to it.
Yep, it's just a bracket that goes on the front of your machine, and you attach on a second set of handlebars right on the front that come down low, so you have control down here. And you can leave those on if you want, or it just has a little knob that you turn and pull it off, and it's out of the way.
Very nice. So why don't you show us how you set up your handlebars for microquilting?
Okay, so for
Forte.
For microquilting, I like to have my hands down close, but with this Microfoot away from the needle.
Right.
So we've got two adjustments on the handlebars. So I'm going to adjust this back one down, and then tighten it back up. And then this front one, it can adjust the length of the handle, so it can come up and down, and it also turns in.
Very nice.
So right now that handlebar is hitting my fabric, so I don't want it down quite that low.
A little higher.
Yep, so just tighten it up where you feel comfortable. And then now I've got my hands down close. You can see I'm resting my arms on the bar. I've got my quilting area really close to me. I don't want to be reaching out really far trying to do micro quilting. You want to be up close and personal with your micro quilting. So right close to you. Okay?
Nice.
Again, for filming purposes, I'm going to move this handlebar back up so it's out of the view.
So everybody
but
can
when
see
I'm
what you're doing.
when I'm really stitching, I'll have both handlebars down there really close.
Okay. And you know, you mentioned that you've got your forearms resting on the pole there. So if you have a machine that, or sorry, the frame that you can choose, you have the Gallery 2 or the Studio 2. If you put it in standard view, it gives you that pole just to rest your arms against, which is nice, right?
Yeah. And even if you do have it down in clear view, you still do have a pole there, just
true.
a little bit lower,
lower.
which sometimes it's even nicer because you don't have a pole to lean over.
Lean over.
So
that makes sense.
Again, personal preference.
Personal preference and trying different things. And you know, we've talked about so many options here. One of the things that I know you've mentioned before when you're micro quilting, you're often changing your position, right?
Yes.
And let's talk about standing versus sitting too.
Well, I can stand at this machine. It's super high. So this would actually be a good height for me for micro quilting. I'm still down here pretty close, and I'm standing right now. My machine at home is set a lot lower, so I would be hunched over trying to do it, and it's not fun. It kills your back. So just keep it close to you without hunching over. So that's why I really enjoy stools when I'm doing ruler work or micro quilting, because I can adjust the height of the stool and get up to where I want it to be. And you know, sometimes I'm lazy and I like to be sitting down instead of standing up.
I am right there with you. I am all about sitting down while I'm quilting. And so if you're quilting and it's like a long day of quilting, do you change your position throughout the day?
Yes, yes. And I like to take breaks also.
Okay.
So take a break, get up, move around. With micro quilting, a different type of break that you don't necessarily think of is you need to take a break for your eyes. This is very intense on your eyes when you're looking down, especially if you've got those lights shining. So I highly recommend every, I don't know, 5 minutes or so, maybe even less, look up, look away from the quilt, look far distance, blink a lot, but let those eyes adjust, and then you can go back to your quilting.
Yeah, it's important to take care of yourself, right?
Yes.
So you can keep quilting all day long.
I wouldn't advise micro quilting for the entire day. You know, I have done it, but yeah.
It makes you tired. It's a good break in between different types of quilting. So okay, so the question is, I'm looking at our list here. Have we covered pretty much everything that we wanted to?
I think so. A couple things, if you have a pro stitcher, you want to make sure your gears are disengaged.
Yes.
So those crosshairs should be purple. Otherwise, your micro quilting is going to be really chunky.
Yeah, and it's just going to be a lot more work moving that machine with those gears engaged. Absolutely.
Micro quilting, again, it can be any design that you want, just on a smaller scale. So doodle, practice different designs, practice making them smaller. And do the same thing with your quilting. Practice quilting at large, practice quilting at small. Sometimes the smaller quilting is intimidating for people.
Right.
I find it's a little bit more forgiving. So if I'm doing a whole bunch of little pebbles, if those lines cross over, there's so much going on right there, you're not going to notice it. But if I did a big circle and I went off, you're going to notice it more. And it's harder to stay on that line. So, so that's my tip. Have fun with it. And travel lines.
Ah, yes.
So getting from one point to another point. With micro quilting, since that thread is blending normally, you can kind of just go over your previous path to get out to a different area that you want to be in. You can also travel over your stitches, or sorry, your seams, the stitch in the ditch, and find ways to get from different points. I rarely will break my thread when I'm doing micro quilting to get from one place to another. Sometimes I do break my thread accidentally, but just loosen up that tension a little bit if you're using a fine thread.
Yeah, and that is a very good tip. Remember, if you are using a lighter thread, loosen that tension, definitely.
Yep.
So, well, I think that pretty much covers micro quilting. Now, I know we always get requests from all of you that watch our videos, and we had a request to actually just see some micro quilting. So we're going to take and just let Kristina quilt for a couple of minutes here, and you guys can just kind of see how she does this. Just watch it and be mesmerized.
And remember, I don't have any lighting, so I purposely picked a design. It's a stipple sort of, but it's straight line stipple and it's crossing over lines. So I did that intentionally because I can't really see where I'm going. Right now I'm still in manual mode. And again, the purpose of this is just to lay down this background fabric. It's not necessarily to show up my quilting design, which again I did intentionally since I can't see very well. When I get to points, I kind of pause at that point so I get a good stitch. I almost have this whole section filled. Now I got to figure out how to get to my next section. So I'm going to travel right through that stitch between those circles and move on to the next section. Make sure you fill in all of the space. Okay, so that section is done.
Wow, Kristina, that's pretty great. What some great quilting. That was fantastic.
So you probably couldn't see a whole lot of the actual stitches or anything, but that's kind of what I am going for with this particular area. So other times I would be, wanting the stitch to show up a little bit more, so I'd pick a prettier design, and like you did on your samples on the capri, maybe choose a thread that shows up a little bit more. So
right.
just depends on what the job is.
Exactly what you're going for.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I hope that answers a lot of the questions that you have about microquilting, and just maybe gets you excited to give it a try on your next quilting project. So because it is the first Tuesday of the month, we are now going to put in our Ruler of the Month club that Kristina does. And this month it's the cable ruler. So enjoy this fun video and we'll see you back after.
This next ruler is our cable template, and it is super cool. It's a little bit trickier to work with because you have to follow some steps, but all of those instructions are on the back of your package, and we're going to show you some different ways that you can use it today. For this ruler, I highly recommend putting Handi grip on, and you want the Handi grip where your hand is going to be holding that ruler. So play with that ruler and see where your hand placement is so that you can get the grip in the best place. You're going to be doing a lot of backtracking, so that's why it's important that your ruler doesn't shift. I'm going to show you 3 different ways. This first one I call the completed cable, where the top is connected all of the way as well as the bottom. This next one, you can see every other one is left open. Okay. This one down here, I just did a partial. So if you get down to a little tiny border and you want a wave kind of look, you don't have to use the entire cable. You can just do part of it. Okay, the third one is actually over here. And if you look at this one, every one on the top, every other one on the top is open and every other one on the bottom is open. So let me show you how we're going to do each one of those. We're going to start with the closed one. I'm going to put this in position here. Oops. Okay, for the first one, we are going to start on number 1. And on the template, it's got this line right here, and it also has etches that show your previous stitches. So those will be really helpful to keep things lined up. Okay, I am going to line that up on my seam, and I'm actually going to go up just a tiny bit. Oh, my needle's down. Can't move it when the needle's down. Move it up just a tiny bit to give myself some wiggle room. Okay, I am now going to stitch from number 1 all the way down to number 2. Then I'm going to backtrack to 4, stop with my needle in the down position, and shift the ruler over to number 1. So let's go through that. 1 to 2, hugging the ruler. I'm going to pause there just for a second, get a good point, and then backtracking until I get to number 4. Stop with the needle down and shift over to number 1. Okay, lining up with my seam. And this point, excuse me, this point where I ended that last one, I want to make sure that that is 1/4 of an inch away from my ruler, because that's where I'm going to actually touch. So we're going to go down to number 2. See how I hit that point right there? Get to number 2, track, up to number 4. Shift the ruler. We'll do one more, lining it up. Let's stitch all the way down. And back to 4. So you can see how I closed in the tops and the bottoms of that one. Okay, let's move down to another section. And we'll do one that has the bottom open. So for this one, I'm going to put it in position here. I'm lining up with my seam. I'm going to do a tie off. So for this one, I'm going to start at number 1, I'm going to stitch down to number 2 just like I did on the last one, but I'm going to stop with my needle down in number 2, shift the ruler over to number 3, and then stitch up to number 1. Then I'm going to back stitch to number 4 and shift the ruler again. So a little bit confusing. You'll get the hang of it. So 1 to 2, let's just start with that part. Okay, from 2, I'm going to slide over so that number 3 is lined up with my needle, keeping the lines straight with my seam. From 3, I'm going to stitch up to number 1. Okay, from number 1, I am going to back stitch back to number 4. Then I'm going to shift my ruler over to number 1, and let's do that one more time. 1 to 2. From 2, we're going to slide the ruler to number 3, stitch from 3 to 1, and that's stitching all the way back to 1. That's matching up and closing that top. Okay, back stitching to number 4, and then shifting over to 1. Okay, so that is the second way that you can do it, with the top closed and the bottom open on every other one. Let's do one more over here. This last one is the wave that is open on the top and the bottom. So for the wave, we're going to put it into number 1. Okay, hugging that ruler there. And you'll notice that my thumb is right on this handy grip and my fingers are right on this piece, and that's how I'm holding that ruler in place. So I'm going to go from 1 to 2. Slide to 3, stitch to 4, slide to 1. Okay, again, 1 to 2, slide to 3, stitch to 4, slide to 1. Okay, I'll move that out of the way, I guess. So 3 different ways that you can use this ruler. I'm sure you can come up with other ways. Post on social media. We want to see what you're doing. But again, this is our cable template, so have fun with it.
Well, wasn't that fun, Kristina? I'm so excited about that ruler. That cable ruler, it just really opens up some possibilities. And I've got to say, I really want to stitch that one out and do some micro quilting around it to really make that cable pop. Don't you think that would look great?
Oh yeah, I've played with that one a little bit, so that is a lot of fun. So.
Well, thanks for joining us. We so appreciate you watching. Be sure to give our video a like, subscribe to our channel, and join us next week. But most of all, have fun quilting.